Today is April 12, 2018. As we draw closer to the inevitable U.S. coalition strikes against the Syrian government, we are all going to hear a lot more propaganda from the West that's going to be put out to convince our citizens that the moral thing to do in this situation is to join with the so-called moderate rebels who are trying to overthrow Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. We are going to be told that they have proof that Assad killed civilians in Douma with chemical weapons, and therefore we must, for the sake of humanity, teach Assad a lesson. Now, some of you are going to be tempted to believe these lies, but I want you to remember what is really going on here and why it is important to not support these military attacks against Assad. As I have pointed out in previous videos, these so-called moderate rebels that are fighting in Douma, where the chemical attack took place, these people are terrorists. They are mercenary forces. Some of them are Syrian citizens, some of them are foreigners. They belong to a rebel faction there in Douma called Jaish al-Islam. I want you to understand this group. This group was formed when two previous militias merged together. And these two previous groups were called, the first one was al-Nusra Front. The second one was the Free Syrian Army, which I'm going to refer to as the FSA. Make no mistake, al-Nusra is and always has been al-Qaeda in Syria. They simply changed their name for tactical purposes. Al-Nusra is a barbaric, bloodthirsty terrorist group, and the FSA was formed by the infamous Muslim Brotherhood terrorist organization. So in Douma, al-Nusra and the FSA, they merged their forces as their numbers started to dwindle, and they just rebranded themselves and called themselves Jaish al-Islam. This group is the group that is claiming that President Assad used chemical weapons. This is the group that the Central Intelligence Agency is backing and helping to coordinate. This is the group that is the real culprit behind the chemical weapons attack. And this is not the first time that al-Nusra and the FSA have committed horrible atrocities together. You need to know the story of the small town of Saddad, Syria. Saddad is located between Damascus and Homs. It is such an ancient town that it's even mentioned twice in the Old Testament. You can go to the book of Numbers, chapter 34, verse 8, and also Ezekiel 47, verse 15. Find references to this very city. It's a peaceful village. It's a very small town. It's home to Assyrian and Syriac families. And the population is approximately 3,500. The people speak the ancient language of Aramaic. Now, that's the same language that was spoken by Jesus himself. In fact, the majority of the residents of Saddad are devout Christians. In October of 2013, these two terrorist groups I've been talking about, al-Nusra and the FSA, they descended on the town of Saddad and they began a massacre. They were targeting the people because of their Christian faith. The town had a small hospital, which had medical supplies. They had a military depot, and the terrorists wanted to seize this. So they went in. The attack began when two of these monstrous al-Nusra suicide bombers blew themselves up near a gas well, which they seized. And at the time of this attack, there weren't even any military or militia forces in town. All they had were their own local police force. The police ended up surrendering to these U.S.-backed terrorists without a fight. They just knew that they were going to be killed. Well, what happened next is that al-Nusra and the FSA set up loudspeakers out in the main square of town, ordering the residents to return to their homes. Then they started patrolling the town, and anyone who didn't hear that announcement or heard it and made the mistake of going outside, the terrorists rounded them up and killed them. The first day they killed 9 residents, 9 Christians that they found out in the streets. By the time that these terrorists were done, they had slaughtered nearly 50 innocent Christians in this small town, which sent shockwaves of horror through the entire community. Residents found the bodies of one family that had been butchered. After killing all 7 members of this Christian family, including their children, al-Nusra and the FSA dumped the bodies in a well, a water well, where the people got their drinking water from. They went around pillaging the town's churches. It was horrifying. Do you know who came to the aid of the people of Assad? It wasn't the United States. It was President Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian Arab Army. As Assad's forces approached Assad, these terrorists used the locals as human shields. And this is something that they have done under the name of Jaish al-Islam. This is what they've done in Douma. And I told you in a previous video about how Jaish al-Islam has tried to hold off Assad and the Syrian army in Douma by rounding up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of citizens and putting them in cages and spreading these cages around the city where Jaish has their weapons and their people to try and stop the Syrian army from attacking. So here's some of the video of that. A calamity, not the first of its savage kind, which only exposes the barbarity and savagery of those who committed it. A family of 6 members in Saddad City and Hom's countryside, terrorists carried out against them the ugliest methods of killing. After tying their hands and gagged their mouths, they shot them in their heads. Then they threw their bodies in an old well beside the house to hide their hatred against humanity and life. The bodies were wrapped with the country's flags to have the final prayers read for them, with saddened eyes greeting them with peace, with tears wondering for what guilt this family was killed. The most precious in this universe, they have gone, left me alone, thanks God. I'm surrounded with these loving people who are still around me. What would you like to tell them? I want to say, let people return to their brains. All the world's problems can only be solved with knowledge and by brains. Enough madness. People's nerves are shredded. Enough, enough. Return to your brains. People, humans, return to your humanity. Enough crimes. Despite mourning 40 martyrs before and this family now, the people of Saddad, they confirm their steadfastness and their insisting to remain in their homeland, calling on the terrorists, if they were Syrians, to return their sanity and brains and return to their homeland. An ugly massacre before the eyes of the whole world and humanity. Where is the humanity in the world? Does humanity in the world accept this ugly crime? What do you say to who? The terrorists? I tell them, don't you have a father and a mother? You don't have brothers and sisters? You don't have families? Return to your brains. If you were Syrians, return to your brains, and if you were non-Syrians, may God curse you. Go back to your countries. Go to your countries. Why did you come here to us? Why? Because among the terrorists there were many non-Arabs and non-Syrians. The martyred mother was able to flee with her 2 sons, but she refused to leave her old handicapped mother-in-law. She was able to leave with the children, but because of her mother-in-law, a handicap, and her parents, they couldn't leave to reach a secure place. After a couple of days of the attack, we found traces of blood on the well. The well, they were killed and dropped in. We were shocked. With the help of civil defense, we tried to remove the dirt thrown over them. They threw over them stuff to cover their ugly crime. With the help of civil defense, we were shocked to find this big massacre. On October 22nd, back in 2013, it appeared that the terrorists had fled the town. But the Syrian army learned as they approached, as they came in, trying to liberate it, they learned that these terrorists were simply hiding in some of the orchards, waiting to ambush the soldiers as they passed by. But by the end of the month, President Assad's forces had managed to fully liberate Saddad. The Christian residents emerged from their homes. First thing they did was they went looking for their dead. Most of the bodies were found in 2 mass graves. There were 10 of their local citizens that were missing, that were never found, probably taken off as sex slaves of these terrorists. Well, the Christians of Saddad were grateful to President Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian army for liberating them from the U.S.-backed terrorists. But the liberation did not come without a very significant cost. More than 100 soldiers died to liberate those Christians. That's the case all across Syria. The Christian community throughout Syria knows who is on their side. They know it isn't Barack Obama. They know it isn't Donald Trump. Those men are the ones who are providing weapons and support to al-Nusra, to the FSA, and now to Jaish al-Islam. Now they know that the people, the Christians of Syria, know who is protecting them, and it's Bashar al-Assad. The man that the New World Order is trying to kill through its political puppets. They know that if Assad is removed from power, they are going to be slaughtered like sheep.
Christians in Syria are criticizing Western media outlets for ignoring atrocities carried out by Takfiri terrorist groups against their community. A new report by the news service of the Pontifical Mission Societies highlights the massacre of 45 Christians in the village of Sa'adat near Damascus. The killing has been the biggest massacre of Christians in the Syrian conflict, which began 2.5 years ago. The report blames the foreign-backed Takfiri militants for the massacre, while criticizing the U.S. government and its mainstream media for remaining silent. Christians say they are fleeing their homes as the persecution is worsening in insurgent-held territories in the north. They say kidnapping, rape, and executions of Christians are being carried out by Takfiri militants and those affiliated with the Western-backed Free Syrian Army.
ISIS is closing in. They're only about 7 miles to the east of that city, in a town called Maheen.
And incidentally, this is a town that was once taken over by Islamic terrorists before.
About 2 years ago it was, and about 50 Christians were killed at that time, and a mass grave was also found in that city. Look, we've seen it before, have we not? Remember Malula about 2 years ago, the city of a Christian town of Malula. Al-Nusra came in and they took over the churches. They've destroyed churches. They want to eliminate any sign of Christianity.
And talk about the relationship that Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, has had with Christians historically. You mentioned Malula, a Christian town. When it was taken over, the Assad regime went in and protected them and got the terrorists out. Do you think they will do the same here?
Well, they did it 2 years ago in this town. They went in shortly after al-Nusra came in, and they defeated them and retook the city. Yes, I think they will do that. This regime values the Christian support. It has protected Christians over the years and will continue to do so if it's able to. You're seeing the Christians realize, wait a minute, these other guys are not going to protect us the way that Assad has. And yes, many of them have taken sides with the regime.
So as you listen to the propaganda over the next few days, as the globalist-controlled mainstream media spins the truth, I want you to remember the tears and the prayers of the Christians of Saddad who were saved by Bashar al-Assad. And I want you to ask yourself if it makes any sense whatsoever that Assad and the Syrian army would go in and gas the very civilians in Douma that the army soldiers have been dying to free from the clutches of Jaish al-Islam. Use your heads. Like they said in the video, use your brains. I know these are dark topics, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I know the difference between right and wrong, and sometimes I just can't separate this indignation that I have from my reporting. And I think that one reason why I decided to make this video today, specifically talking about the subject of the Christian persecution in Syria by these U.S.-backed rebels, because I normally don't single it out and talk about the Christian persecution. I think that it doesn't matter what faith you are, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, no religion, any of this persecution is bad. But I think what put this in my head today is a letter that I received from a woman named Piper. And I felt very moved by what she wrote to me. And I want to share just a couple of lines from this with you. So bear with me. She wrote, I wanted to let you know how appreciative I am for your channel and the information you bring into the light. I especially loved the dialogue in your travel to California videos that you taught key aspects of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It just warmed me inside and out to hear you teach something so beautiful on your journey to do something to combat heinous and despicable crimes against humanity. This is, I think she's referring to when I was doing my investigation on child trafficking out in California last summer. I love all the simple, short history lessons you do to teach people the truth about what's really happening. I feel you are part of and helping others to be a part of fulfilling this scripture, which is, teach ye diligently, and my grace shall attend you, that you may be instructed more perfectly in theory, in principle, in doctrine, in the law of the gospel, in all things that pertain unto the kingdom of God, that are expedient for you to understand, of things both in heaven and in the earth and under the earth, things which have been, things which are, things which must shortly come to pass, things which are at home, things which are abroad, the wars and perplexities of the nations, and the judgments which are on the land, and a knowledge also of countries and of kingdoms, that ye may be prepared in all things when I shall send you again to magnify the calling whereunto I have called you, and the mission with which I have commissioned you. Behold, I send you out to testify and warn the people. And it becometh every man that hath been warned to warn his neighbor. Therefore they are left without excuse, and their sins are upon their own heads. And she writes, I also feel you are definitely a head watchman on the tower, and this is part of your earthly mission. And I just want to say thank you to Piper for that. It was very heartwarming. There have been so many dark things, dark subjects that I do work with. I do have a heavy heart with the child trafficking and the wars and the murders, the combinations and conspiracies of intelligence networks and what they do, not just abroad, but domestically in places like Las Vegas. So, yes, I am a Christian. And for those who watch my videos, you know that I don't ever try to guilt trip anyone. I never try and cram my beliefs down anybody's throat. In fact, it's not all that often that I even reference my religious faith. But at the same time, I make no apology for speaking from time to time about what it is that really motivates me and guides me in my journalistic and investigative efforts. I try to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, who is known as the Prince of Peace. I believe that he is our Savior, that he wants us to be peacemakers. I don't think he wants us to be warmongers who go out and commit, either us or our governments, to go commit violence on any scale, small or large, especially in this case, the case of what's going on in Syria, which is massive, large-scale violence to further the greed and ambitions of oil corporations and the military-industrial complex that controls our politicians and our Washington, D.C. bureaucrats, because that's what Syria is all about. It has nothing whatsoever to do with trying to hold some tyrant accountable for a chemical weapons attack. Heavens, if killing civilians justifies a war, Syria ought to come over here and attack the United States, because last year alone, in 1 month, the United States killed over 1,000 Syrian civilians in the fighting. That's the truth, and that was confirmed by the U.S. Army. So that's not what this is about. It's about money. It's about control of resources. It's about geopolitical power on behalf of the New World Order puppets, the United States and Israel. It's about the Greater Israel Project. All of these things. It's about Saudi control, rivalry against Iran. So I invite you all, knowing the difference between what is right and what is wrong, and keeping in mind this story of the town of Saddad, and knowing that if Bashar al-Assad falls, these Christians across Syria are going to be slaughtered. keep that in mind and push back against the propaganda. Take a stand for what is right. And war against Syria is not right. I want to remind you all that I am putting a lot of my information up on my website, blackstoneintel.com. Go there, check it out. I've even got photographic evidence from Duma that proves that the terrorists, Jaish al-Islam, went around staging propaganda photos. They took the bodies of these dead children that they murdered, and they posed them in different positions. And you can see how they goofed up using the bodies in different locations. That's on my website. And of course, this propaganda material is all designed to try and get Western justification, to persuade Western governments to come attack Assad and the Syrian military on behalf of these terrorists and the New World Order that they're working for. And you guys can also find, I do updates at facebook.com/blackstoneintel. I try and do multiple updates of what's going on and what information I'm hearing from various sources there on that site. So make sure and check that out, facebook.com/blackstoneintel. Thank you all for watching. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.
The Christians realize, wait a minute, these other guys are not going to protect us the way that Assad has. And yes, many of them have taken sides with the regime.